takes part in the meeting, and CNN has some reporting that Republicans seem to be dismayed by her presence there. What's going on here?
Well, and there is some pushback on that, as Jeff is also reporting. Look, I think Republicans were dismayed by what was occurring in the meeting, and so they may have acted like they were dismayed by Ivanka. We don't really know the whole story yet about whether she was in the meeting apparently to talk about child care, tax credits, et cetera, and she may have provided some relief to Republicans who didn't like what was going on.
I think there's also a question just among Republicans on how much juice Ivanka has. There's all this palace intrigue constantly about how much influence she has over the president, right? She's the most powerful advisor in the White House, but when push comes to shove, she doesn't land on the same side as the president on a lot of these issues. And I think that's a constant conversation, I think a Washington conversation about, is she just in the room as a symbol, or does she really have some pull and influence over the president?
We know that she is very committed to this issue that she was in there to talk to leaders about. And this is the first time, we are in September, the first time that these four leaders have sat down at the White House with the president. That's sort of unusual. But I'm told, as a fuller picture this comes together, as Gloria was saying earlier, Republicans were annoyed in general. I'm told that
Yes.
Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell was a bit more annoyed by Ivanka Trump, perhaps, but by the whole picture. Speaker Ryan has said in a statement he was not annoyed by her at all.
All right, very good point. All right, Jeff Zeleny, David Catanese, Gloria Borger, thank you to all of you. Next, President Trump says that he's ending the Dreamer program, which protects undocumented young people brought to the U.S. by their parents who really know no other country other than America. Then he tweets that he might revisit this decision. Then today he insists he's not sending mixed messages. One of the state attorneys general who threatened to sue over that Obama-era program is going to join me live. There's a clash developing over the different Russia investigations underway by two government groups. In this case, it's the House versus the FBI, as both look into any possible ties between the Trump campaign and Russia. California Congressman Devin Nunes is threatening to put Attorney General Jeff Sessions and FBI Director Christopher Wray behind bars for not complying with his order. Remember, Nunes supposedly had stepped aside directing the House Russia investigation, but now he has threatened to hold Sessions and Wray in contempt for not handing over documents about that much talked about Russia dossier if they don't do it by December 14th. This is a dossier that you may recall was an explosive report by a former British spy, Christopher Steele. It contained unverified claims that Russian operatives had compromising personal information on then candidate Trump. Joining me now is a Democratic member of the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence, Mike Quigley. Congressman, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today. And I just want to know right off the top, what's your reaction to this letter?
Yeah, it's extraordinarily unfortunate. This is the most important investigation in our lifetime, certainly of the White House, perhaps more important than Watergate. It is our standard practice to try to act on a bipartisan basis. It's never been more important than an investigation like this, and to see a confrontational act like this is disappointing, to say the least.
So disappointing, to say the least. We heard from Congressman Gowdy, who, of course, is a Republican member of the committee that you're on. He talked to the Washington Examiner about this and why he wants these documents. He said, I want to know the extent to which it was relied upon, if at all, by any of our intelligence agencies or federal law enforcement agencies. And to the extent it was relied upon, how did they vet or either corroborate or contradict the information in it? Is that your perception of what Congressman Nunes is seeking here? Is that the reason that you understand he's looking for this information?
Well, that's the reason I hear from them. What I actually perceive when I hear that is their attempt to discredit Christopher Steele, rather than doing our due diligence to see if, in fact, the dossier is accurate or not. And if you want information, there's a standard practice here. You first seek voluntary compliance, and you do so on a bipartisan basis. If that doesn't work, then with advising consent from the minority, you go forward with a subpoena. But we've committed to working with the Justice Department to coordinate with them on these three investigations. That coordination is especially important now When you go to a confrontational mode first, it makes it far more difficult for further cooperation to exist.
Is it fair, though, for Congress, or in this case Republicans, obviously, since they don't have Democratic support in this, to look into Christopher Steele and this dossier? Some of the things in it are, as far as we can tell, unfounded. Many of them are controversial. Is it fair to look into that and to see if the FBI relied heavily on this or looked into this? What would the problem be with looking into these allegations?
I think it's valuable for us to do our due diligence to see if the dossier is accurate. I've never been made aware of anything about it that is inaccurate, but I think you'll let the investigation take its course. To jump in now, again, on a confrontational tact makes absolutely no sense. I think our commitment was to work with the Mueller investigation and to provide assistance when we can, not accuse them of things as my Republican colleagues are at this point.
Do you generally feel like Republicans are cooperating with special counsel?
Look, I think we had a good situation set up with Mr. Schiff and Mr. Conaway working on our side with the Justice Department, with Mr. Mueller. I thought we had an understanding that we were going to coordinate, and I applaud their work. This is a tact in the opposite direction. It's not going to help any of the investigations.
I want to ask you about what appears to be a conflict that has come up. Paul Manafort, former chief of Donald Trump's campaign, one of them, the second to last, he has spoken, of course, to Senate investigators. There's a transcript of that discussion, but it appears his lawyers, or we know that his lawyers, are saying no, that the FBI cannot access this, that special counsel Robert Mueller can't have access to this. What do you think about that?
Yeah, it's another element in the same problem. The Senate investigation, the House investigation, and the Justice Department investigation have to be coordinated. If there is a big problem with these efforts from the very beginning, is that there was no understanding that the Senate and the House were going to work together. Frankly, I think there should just be one congressional investigation. You start to see the fissures that exist when you don't have that agreement, that cooperation, that coordination. You have conflicts like this. Again, we have to understand that the single purpose of this is far more important than the egos or the conflicts that might exist between branches of government and the House and the Senate.
The former National Security Advisor Susan Rice testified before your committee today. I know some of it you certainly can't tell us what she said, but coming out of that, what were your, I guess, impressions about what she said? Were new questions raised? Were your answers, or were your questions answered?
Yeah, I can't talk about what she talked about. I can say that she's an important witness, and I thought she did an excellent job. She's only one of a long series of witnesses that we have to question.
Did you learn anything new, though? Was there anything that surprised you or anything that shed light on something you weren't previously aware of?
I think it's important to put it in this context. I think the majority is attempting to use the issues of masking and unmasking as an attempt to deflect from the core purpose of this investigation. So it's my sense that that's why the majority wanted her there, but I can't talk about much in specifics as to what she testified to.
Yeah, we do understand that. All right, Congressman Mike Quigley of the Intel Committee on the House side. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Floridians are keeping a very close eye on Irma.
The Russia investigation back in the spotlight. Former National Security Advisor Susan Rice has been meeting this morning with the House Intelligence Committee. Seeing some video right there. Tomorrow, it will be Donald Trump Jr.'s turn in the hot seat. The president's son facing questions in the Russia investigation. His first time facing congressional investigators. CNN senior congressional reporter Mani Raju has all of the details on this. Mani, what are you picking up? I just spoke with Joaquin Castro. I don't know if you had a chance to hear. He called the conversation with Susan Rice very informative.
It seems that there are a lot of questions there in that particular session about the issue of unmasking, but that is really not going to be the focus on the Senate side, not for the Senate Judiciary Committee or in the Senate Intelligence Committee. And the Senate Judiciary Committee, of course, now the home of this first venue of the first time that Donald Trump Jr. will actually answer questions about that June 2016 Trump Tower meeting with Russian operatives, Paul Manafort, Jared Kushner. Now, this is going to be a staff level meeting. All of the Judiciary Committee staff, some members can sit in on the meeting, but I am told that there's expectation that Donald Trump Jr. should appear publicly. And one top Democratic senator on that committee, Dianne Feinstein, told me that if he does not appear publicly, the committee is prepared to subpoena him.
There's an interview scheduled. I'm not sure exactly where it is. It's a staff interview.
Right. Will there be committee members going?
I can't comment on that because I don't know.
What about yourself?
The process that we decided on, if a committee member wants to go and drop in, that's fine. But these are staff interviews, and the staff is not to be interrupted. No senators to take over the interview.
Do you plan on going, Senator?
No, I do not. We will have a public hearing with Mr. Trump at an appropriate time.
And I followed up with her, asked her specifically about whether or not she'd be subpoenaed. He would be subpoenaed, and she said that yes, that is very likely that he could be subpoenaed if he does not actually appear for this public interview, which I believe they had an agreement to deal with. Now, also another question for the Judiciary Committee and the Intelligence Committees to look at are the issues about efforts to build this Trump Tower Moscow project, something that we understand now that Trump's attorney Michael Cohen was pursuing even during the time of the campaign. This is something that Lindsey Graham, the Republican senator from South Carolina, also said that he's interested in learning about it, whether or not this is any evidence of business dealings with Russia. He also expects Cohen also to come, Kate, to his committee as well.
Any timing guidance yet on when? I mean, this would be a huge deal if Donald Trump Jr. appears publicly in a hearing. Any timing guidance on that?
We've been asking members. We don't have an indication that it's been scheduled yet. But that's something that some Democrats in particular want to happen this month. Chuck Grassley declined to comment, the chairman of the committee, when I asked him about that just moments ago, Kate.
Stand by for that. Great to see you, Manu. Thank you. We are staying very close to Hurricane Irma, monstrous Category 5 storm as it moves closer to the United States. The latest from the National Hurricane Center and a look at the worsening conditions happening right now in Puerto Rico. That's coming up.
Her name is Maida, and she was
right now criticizing the action the president took yesterday in regards to 800,000 Dreamers. And Senator Chuck Schumer, the Senate Minority Leader, said what he wants to see is a clean vote on a bill to protect these 800,000 people. And if he doesn't get it, he says they will try to attach a version of that bill to everything else the Senate discusses going forward. Back now with our panel, Matt Lewis, first to you. You can sort of see now where Democrats are going to go with this. I think they want to wait and see what the Republicans come up with right now, but they have that luxury of sitting back and waiting and picking their spots.
Yeah, I think, again, I think Donald Trump has done no favor for House Republicans who have a lot on their plate as it is, and he's put them in an unenviable position. The Republican base is very worried about immigration, actually wants to curtail certainly illegal immigration, in some cases illegal immigration. And so they have the choice, the Republicans have the choice of being uncompassionate or going against their base. And this is this is the liberal version of, in the abortion debate on the right, there are a lot of people who have different positions on abortion, but when Republicans talk about partial birth abortion or late-term abortion, they almost always win. For decades, Republicans scored a lot of points talking about partial birth abortion. This is that version on the left, okay? Immigration's a hot button issue. There's a lot of controversy about it. But as long as Democrats can talk about dreamers, they will always win. You can tell that Senator Schumer here is running up the score. It's really impossible to be against the dreamers. These are exactly, if you believe in assimilation, if you want, people who would join the military are gonna help America, this is who you want in the country. It's hard to be against them, and yet, where does it end? I mean, what about somebody who, what about a young immigrant brought here tomorrow through no fault of their own? At what point do we say, well, that person should be allowed to stay too?
But Matt, you bring up what's so important here, and it's language and how it's described, right? So it's described by some Republicans and Democrats, like you just heard Chuck Schumer, the way that you describe Dreamers, right, which is hard to argue with. And then it's described by other conservatives like Steve King completely differently as amnesty, and where does it end, right? And when you look at this, Scott, and you look at some of the polling, I mean, the most recent polling that we could find purely on DACA is October last year at CBS, and the way it's described is that 9 out of 10 Americans support a path to citizenship for those who came to the U.S. illegally as children if certain requirements are met. 9 out of 10 Americans, if it's described that way. It's just not as simple as that.
Well, I think the Dreamers have broad support in both parties, and that's ultimately, I'm going to choose to be the glass half full guy here. I think the Republicans in the Congress will ultimately pass something that gives them the status that they deserve. What I think is really terrible, though, is this hyper-partisan rhetoric coming out of Pelosi and Schumer. Remember, Donald Trump didn't create this executive order mess. He inherited this executive order from Barack Obama, and his administration's lawyers, along with many, many other legal scholars, believe that if it had been challenged in court, it would have lost. Donald Trump, I think, here is trying to find a way to get this codified in U.S. law and not leave it up to a court or a future president to kick out this executive order. So ultimately, I hope the Dreamers get what they deserve, which is a law instead of some tenuous executive order that Donald Trump inherited illegally from a previous administration.
And it's an executive order. It's an executive order that President Obama felt he had to write because Congress did not act. Congress has had multiple opportunities to show us that they are humane, that they care about the plight of these young people who have again contributed to this economy, who are assets to our country, again, who are Americans in every single way except on paper. And they have failed to act. And so President Barack Obama acted as a stopgap measure, not to say that this is the only answer, but to put something in place to at least take care of the Dreamers for now, and then the issue would be revisited. Well, now we are revisiting the issue under a false deadline from President Trump, but we're revisiting the issue.
Trump had to revisit the issue because he's going to be sued. The state attorneys general are going to sue the federal government. The issue
I think what's really important here is there is nothing to stop those attorney generals from suing today, because they could file suit tomorrow. I'm not an attorney, but I do communications for a litigation team, and I can tell you that you can file a suit at any time, 12 p.m., 12 a.m., whenever you want to file the suit can go. And so there's nothing to say that the suit won't be filed. There's also nothing to say that Congress cannot concurrently act on DACA while DACA is still in place. There's nothing. So this is a false notion that was put forth to make President Trump seem as though he was struggling with the Dreamers and struggling with this issue. But to be frank, if something really wanted to happen,
why do you want the Dreamers to exist under an executive order and not a U.S. law? Wouldn't you prefer this to be a law instead of an executive order?
And I agree, Scott, but what I'm saying is you do not need to throw 800,000.
I got to cut this off. As great as this discussion is, we got to go listen to the Speaker of the House, Paul Ryan.
It's really been impressive. When this all started to unfold, they were reaching out to express the urgency of the situation. I mean, 52 inches of rain, this is something we've never seen before. And so they made it clear to us just how vast this problem was. And as soon as we finish here, the House will take action, as Kevin just said, on installment on this. We will not leave until this is done. Nothing can really capture just how big and wide this devastation is. You hear a lot of numbers, tens of thousands of people in shelters, hundreds of thousands of homes damaged. Nothing can really capture this. When we look at, and you turn on the TV in America today, you look at all the vitriol, you look at the bitterness, you look at, rioting and all the rest of this, you begin to wonder whether or not our civil society is holding together. This hurricane shows that it is. This shows that our civil society is still very, very civil. An email went around Janesville, Wisconsin to the various churches and schools, and we wanted to fill up one semi-trailer at Farm and Fleet with a business named Huffcore to send some aid down to the J.J. Watt Foundation, a local hero plays for the Houston Texans. And the next day, when we all collected stuff at our kids' schools, we didn't fill one semi-trailer, we filled 9. That's just in Janesville, Wisconsin. getting aid down to Houston. And so what I think is a good story out of all of this is, in this country, citizens, when they see other citizens in need, they step up and they answer the call. And so it is something that we should take stock and encouragement from. Now, we, government, have a responsibility as well. And as the majority leader said, technology is a good thing and it's helping us. But what it's also doing is it's moving money very fast through the system, as it should. And that is why we will not leave until we get this done, to make sure that the response is there. We've got another hurricane right now, Hurricane Irma, headed to our shores, and it's critical that we act immediately. So for now, we've got to make sure that we team up with our first responders. We are really encouraged and heartened by the people grabbing their boats and going and rescuing their citizens, by people all around America sending aid. And with one more hurricane, one that 185-mile-per-hour winds hitting our shores again, those people in that line are in our thoughts and our prayers. So I just think it's really important that we take stock of the fact that civil society in America is well and alive and is on display. Citizens are helping each other, and the government will be there to respond to the needs of these people who have faced this unprecedented devastation. Any questions?
Mr. Speaker, following the president's decision yesterday on DACA, you put the ball in Congress's court, and I was wondering whether you would support a standalone bill to address the DACA fix, or whether you think there needs to be broader immigration. And then the second part is, you previously had told conservatives when you became Speaker you would not bring an immigration bill to the floor without a majority of Republicans supporting it. Do you still stand by that?
So first, let me say, President Obama was wrong to do it in the first place because he overstepped his constitutional bounds. We, the President and Congress, take an oath to support and defend the Constitution. So President Trump was right in his decision. He made the right call. I'm also encouraged by the fact that he gave us time to work out a consensus, to find a compromise, because these kids don't, for the most part, don't know any other home than the United States. So I think the president was right to give us the time we need to find that compromise. Where does that compromise exist? That's what we're going to spend the next months figuring out, where that compromise is. But I think it's totally reasonable and appropriate that when you take a look at the DACA dilemma, this is a dilemma that in large part stems from the fact that it is a symptom of a larger problem. And the larger problem is that we do not have control of our borders. And so it's only reasonable and fitting that we also address the root cause of the problem, which is borders that are not sufficiently controlled, while we address this very real and very human problem that's right in front of us. So I think that's perfectly reasonable. As to your second part of your question, we will not be advancing legislation that does not have the support of President Trump, because we're going to work with the president on how to do this legislation. And if we have legislation coming through here that is worked with and supported by the president, I'm very confident that our members will support that. Susan.
The Democrats now say they'll only support a 3-month increase in the debt ceiling. It seems like they're trying to extract something out of the dreamer.
I think that's a ridiculous idea. I hope that they don't mean that. Let's just think about this. We've got all this devastation in Texas. We've got another unprecedented hurricane about to hit Florida. And they want to play politics with the debt ceiling? That will strand the aid that we need to bring to these victims of these storms that have occurred or are about to occur. And then they also want to threaten default on our debt. I think that's ridiculous and disgraceful that they want to play politics with the debt ceiling at this moment when we have fellow citizens in need to respond to these hurricanes so that we do not strand them. I think what the leaders you just described proposed is unworkable, and it could put in jeopardy the kind of hurricane response we need to have. Look, many of us got the calls from the administration and OMB who said FEMA is moving so fast that we're running out of money as early as Friday to Tuesday. So we've got to make sure that we have the authority, legal authority, to go out and be able to put money back into FEMA so we can respond to these hurricanes, not to mention the fact that we already have to start pre-positioning for the fact that Irma is about to hit Florida. And to play politics with a debt ceiling like Schumer and Pelosi apparently are doing, I don't think is a good idea. Chad.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To that end, though, you say it's disgraceful, but why not then lift the debt ceiling on your own with your own side? The Democrats historically have been critical of your side of not providing the votes on big things. You guys have the majority. Why not provide the votes on your side then? If it's that important, and make that argument with your Congress.
As you know, this takes 60 votes in the Senate. I think what the president doesn't want to do is give more leverage where it shouldn't occur on the debt ceiling. As you know, this takes 60 votes in the Senate. If this was a majority-only vote, we could do what you're saying, but it's not a majority vote. It is a 60-vote bill in the Senate. You know that. Yeah.
Last question. Hundreds of thousands of Dreamers are now looking to you to see what comes next here. Can you guarantee them that you will take action on this issue, that you will hold a vote at some point in these
Look, I think people should rest easy, and I think the president made the right call, and the president also gave us the time and space we're going to need to find where that compromise is. As I mentioned in my opening remarks, this is a home that people know, and they don't know any other country as a home. And so I think there's a serious humane issue here that needs to be dealt with. But it's only fitting and reasonable that we also deal with some of the root causes of this problem, because what we don't want to have happen is another DACA problem in 10 years from now. We want to make sure that we fix this issue for these kids, for these young people, and address the root cause of the problem so we don't have the same thing 10 years from now. And that's totally proper. So I do believe that there is a compromise to be had here. I do believe that Congress, and we're going to work with our members to find out where that compromise is so that we can bring resolution to this very legitimate problem. Thank you.
House Speaker Paul Ryan there with a few major headlines saying it's reasonable that Congress should address border security at the same time that it addresses DACA. Also saying that they will not move forward any legislation that they don't know that the president will sign off on. As Marco Rubio said, tell us what you will sign off on, Mr. President. So they don't have that answer yet.
No idea what the president would support or would sign. That message from Paul Ryan right now. We will see how to kind of square that circle. All right, we are just minutes away now from an updated forecast on Hurricane Irma. Is it still directing its ire at Florida even after it goes through millions of Americans in Puerto Rico? We'll get that update in just All right, the breaking news has to do with the Russia investigation. We just learned that Donald Trump Jr. will go to Capitol Hill tomorrow to talk about alleged contacts between his father's campaign and Russia. Also, there's a meeting behind closed doors right now with another key figure. CNN senior congressional correspondent Manu Raju joins us with the very latest. Manu.
Yeah, that's right. Donald Trump Jr., the first time he will have a chance to undergo extensive questioning from both Senate Judiciary Committee staff and members tomorrow, going behind closed doors. This, of course, after the revelations that he had met with Russian operatives in June 2016 after being promised dirt on the Clinton campaign, a meeting that also included Paul Manafort, then the campaign chairman, and Jared Kushner. Now, I am told also separately that the Senate Intelligence Committee does plan to question Donald Trump Jr. as well, and the chairman of that committee, Richard Burr, told me yesterday there are a number of questions that are the committee still has about what the Russians actually intended to happen from that meeting. Now, Donald Trump Jr. is trying to make very clear that he's going to cooperate, saying, his lawyer saying in a statement, we look forward to a professional and productive meeting and appreciate the opportunity to assist the committee. Now, another big name, John and Poppy, is Susan Rice, President Obama's former national security advisor and someone who has been criticized by Republicans for her handling of intelligence reports, believing she had unmasked the identities of individuals, may have even leaked them to the press. This is something that she has denied, but I am told that she is going behind closed doors, is going to undergo a grilling, and one person who may be there could be Devin Nunes, the Republican chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, who really has gone after the issue of unmasking, so much so that it eventually forced him to step aside from that investigation. And separately, Devin Nunes, is leading a push to actually force the Attorney General Jeff Sessions and the FBI Director Christopher Wray to provide documents about that British dossier showing connections between the Trump campaign and Russian officials, and warning that he may even hold them in contempt of Congress if they do not produce documents backing up some of the questions that he has asked. Really shows a fast pace of developments happening from multiple committees on Capitol Hill, first with Don Jr. tomorrow and also Susan Rice today, guys.
Yeah, the Russia investigation launching into full gear. Now the Congress is back. Manu Raju, thanks so much. And it's on top of all the policy that Congress wants to be making right now, or maybe trying to be making. The president meets soon with top party leaders on both sides of the aisle. It's just hours after saying if Congress can't help Dreamers, he will revisit the issue.
So now our panel is going to tell us what that means, because we're wondering. Everyone's wondering this morning. David Gergen is here, Abby Phillip, and David Gregory. So Abby, he starts the 6-month stopwatch. yesterday, right, with this Jeff Sessions announcement on DACA. And then last night, he sort of stops it or flips it or breaks it or what have you, and basically says, we're going to revisit the issue. I will personally revisit this if Congress cannot legalize DACA. Explain.
Well, a lot of this has to do with the media coverage of the last 24 hours, which was, I think, really overwhelmingly negative. A lot of the coverage focusing on the some 800,000 young people who are now kind of in limbo as a result of this decision. And Trump has from the very beginning been concerned about that. That's why he keeps saying something that's a little bit different from what you hear from his staff, from Sarah Huckabee Sanders, from Jeff Sessions, who talks a lot more about about the rule of law and about process, and Trump keeps talking about heart. And there's a disconnect here between what he did and what he keeps saying. So, I think his aides are holding out for the possibility that at some point in the future, maybe if we get to the 6-month mark and Congress doesn't do anything, Trump could simply change his mind. It's hard to see how that works from a legal perspective because, of course, there is sort of the looming threat of challenges out there, but it reflects the fact that Trump is just really not sure what he wants to do about this, and he wants to find a way to make everybody happy, including his base, and his base will not be happy with anything short of getting rid of DACA. They may not even be happy with Congress legalizing DACA, frankly.
David Gergen, we often ask the question, if voters or people understand what the president is saying or thinks. We might legitimately ask if the president understands what he is saying or thinks right now. And what's Congress supposed to do with this? They want a tight 6-month deadline up until, 8:30 last night when the president said, you know what, I'll go back to this if I have to.
I don't know what they're going to make of it, John. It's very weird, very odd. I sympathize with the president in that these are hard decisions, but you know what? That's why you run for president. The big decisions come to you, and to lead is to decide. And here he's waffling in the presidency, but more importantly, he has upended. What they did yesterday upended the lives of hundreds of thousands of young people in this country who are reporting to college this week around the country, or they're in jobs, and they don't know what their lives are going to be like 3 months, 6 months from now. They don't know where they're going. They have to make plans. They may be deported. There's a good chance they'll be sent out of the country if this isn't resolved. So you really have to, in this case, focus not on the president's waffling, but on the chaos and the cruelty that's involved here.
David Gregory, so this will likely split the Republican Party, fracture it. We've already seen who's on which side so far, right? But you have two options, don't you? You have either something happens at the 6 months, and as the president said, DACA is legalized by Congress, and they may head into the midterms if they can't get other big accomplishments through, with their one big legislative accomplishment being some form of amnesty for these folks, or you have them heading into the midterms without helping these 800,000 young people in this country. Neither is great for the party, is it?
Look, there's an opportunity here. There's a big time opening here for President Trump if he can see his way to seizing it. And it is that leadership piece. Talking to Republicans on the Hill, there's an opportunity to fix, at least temporarily, this Dreamer situation, and maybe it's just a deferral of a few years, but to couple it in terms of a longer fix with some element of border security. You've heard Lindsey Graham. He talked this morning on New Day about a down payment on comprehensive immigration reform. I don't think the politics are right for something that comprehensive, but the reality is that Donald Trump is the leading Republican voice on immigration in America. He campaigned on this. He swept up the energy among the conservative base about this push for border security. He has an opportunity to work for Congress, with Congress, if he will actually lead on this issue, to get something on border security. It's probably not going to be this ill-conceived wall notion, but he can still do it and declare victory and also help the Dreamers as well and force Congress to do its job. There's actually nothing inherently wrong with President standing up and saying, Congress, actually do your job. But he's got to lead them. He's been such a bystander on so many issues. This is an area where he's actually got to lead.
Well, David Gregory is right, as he always is. The big complicating factor here, though, is that the president or the White House is saying two things at once, it seems. Sarah Sanders at the White House yesterday says the president wants to sign comprehensive immigration reform, and maybe only comprehensive immigration reform. Protecting the Dreamers would only be part of that. But the president's own words overnight, again, if we parse the statement that he sent out to the American people last night, he says Congress now has 6 months to legalize DACA. He made it seem, Abby, as if maybe he would sign something that was a discrete measure just to protect these 800,000 people. Marco Rubio was basically begging the president overnight, tell us what you'll sign, Mr. President.
The reality is he hasn't told Congress anything about what he wants, what he might sign. I was communicating with House leadership aides yesterday, and they were like, we have no idea if he would sign a bill that legalizes DACA or if he would sign something else immigration related. We don't know if they want to couple the wall funding. They haven't made those decisions yet, which is really surprising given the magnitude of the decision that was made yesterday, that they hadn't thought about what happened next, what the legislative strategy is going to be. I think it'll be actually a tough decision. Honestly, there are a lot of people talking to the president right now who do not want him to play ball on DACA. They are not happy with the way that this has gone down. They don't like the talk of Congress legalizing this program. And so he's going to get pulled in a lot of different directions. There may be a growing consensus on the Hill, for one thing, but the president is definitely being influenced in the other direction. It'll be hard for him to push through his base on this issue, no matter what, Congress
But that's the
wants
combination that's important. There are too many Republicans, and even some Democrats, I presume, who consider just acting on the Dreamers as in a way that it incentivizes illegal behavior. That's why I think there's got to be, in a lot of Republicans' minds who want to deal on this, something on border security that's tied to this. There's been a lot of momentum for that for a long time, frankly, going back to, say, 2005, more of a crackdown on border security. So that's where you may see some compromise if they can marry those two things together.
The question, though, is what is border security? I mean, is it the wall or is it
I think it's
security?
something short of the
And I
wall.
think
Something short of the wall.
I think it's going to be short of the wall, but will the president want something short of the wall?
But he could declare victory if it's short of the wall, if it still looks like it's his plan. But again, that's what they've got to create a path for him, and he's got to know how to actually take it and not just be a bystander.
All right, guys, we're out of time. Thank you all for being here very much. David Gergen, Abby Phillip, David Gregory. So Senator Bob Menendez's corruption trial just kicked off this morning in New Jersey, and this is a big deal. You see him walking just moments ago because this is the first bribery case involving a sitting U.S. senator in over 3 decades. So Menendez spoke to reporters just moments ago as he headed into court for day one. Let's listen.
I appreciate all of my supporters who have stood by me as I try to clear my name. I am thankful for the countless New Jerseyans who have either called me or called my office and say they have my back as I've had theirs. Not once have I dishonored my public office.
So what is he facing? He is accused of accepting hundreds of thousands of dollars in what the prosecutors call bribes, flying on private jets, taking paid vacations, all by this doctor who donated a lot of money to his campaign, gave him a lot of gifts, and now it's on the prosecution to prove that beyond a reasonable doubt.
And if the New Jersey Democrat is convicted, his replacement, and if he were to lose his seat, would be appointed by a Republican governor, which causes all kinds of issues for the Democratic Party. We will follow this case very, very closely. The president may be putting pressure on Congress to fix the protection for Dreamers. Maybe he released that pressure. We will ask a key member of the Senate what she thinks about the president's statements next.
So President Trump punting DACA back to Congress, putting pressure on lawmakers to fix that legislation that shields undocumented immigrants brought here as children by their parents from deportation.
Yeah, he punted, but then overnight seemed to try to regain possession, sort of. Let's discuss this with Democratic Senator Maggie Hassan of New Hampshire. Senator, thank you so much for being with us. Maybe you can help us understand. The president overnight said that if Congress can't legalize DACA, he will revisit the issue. How do you interpret that? What do you think he means?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me this morning. Look, I am very concerned about President Trump's decision here and his tweet last night just seem to add uncertainty. What we should be focused on is making sure that we are deporting criminals and those who pose a threat to our public safety, not hardworking dreamers who know no other country than the United States of America and who are contributing to our economy and our society. So I strongly support the DREAM Act and hope very much that we're going to be able to pass it with bipartisan support because we know that these young people who are, by all intents and purposes, living in America, being Americans, contributing to the economy and society, should have a path forward to citizenship.
Senator, what if that legislation in the next 6 months came to you and your fellow Democrats with also some funding for border protection or for a border wall even? Is that something you could get on board with? Meaning, what will you and what do you think your party should give on this to protect the dreamers?
I think it's very, very important that we find a path forward for dreamers. It's also very important that we strengthen border security. So I think you'll find a bipartisan commitment to making sure that we can accomplish both things. It's long past time for comprehensive immigration reform in the United States, which has to include border security and a path forward for people to become citizens after they've paid fines and taxes, for instance. And there's been that kind of bipartisan support in the United States Senate in the past. I hope that we can come together and really focus on solving the problem and stay away from our partisan corners on this.
Wall funding, yes or no?
I'm sorry?
Funding
I didn't hear
for the
you.
Funding for the president's border wall, though, would that be a yes or no for you?
I don't think there is support for the kind of border wall that the president's been talking about. I think a lot of us understand that that isn't the most effective way to secure our borders. And so I'd focus on how we can secure our borders, listening to people.